A millionaire single father witnessed a waitress sharing a dance with her disabled daughter, and it changed her life forever. The diner felt peaceful that afternoon, bathed in the golden glow of the sun filtering through the tall windows. Small dust particles floated gently through the calm air as the aroma of freshly baked pie and coffee slowly filled the space. Outside, the pace of life was slow. A dog snoozing on the sidewalk, the breeze rustling the leaves, and the occasional car passing by created a serene atmosphere. Inside, Ellie wiped down the counter again, even though it had already been cleaned twice. There were no new orders to take and no customers to serve, except for one. She looked over the corner of the diner near the window booth and smiled. Max, an 8-year-old boy, sat there, serious and wide-eyed. Max was in his wheelchair, with a sketchbook on his lap and a crayon in his hand. His father, Logan, had stepped out to take a phone call, leaving Max alone with his drawings. Max always drew trees. He drew tall trees, bent ones, sometimes with birds perched on them, other times with only bare branches. Ellie quietly approached and crouched beside him, so they were at eye level. "Hey, Max," she said softly, tilting her head toward him. "How's the masterpiece coming along today?" Max looked up and gave her a small smile. "It's a pine tree this time," he replied, "just like the ones by our driveway." "It's beautiful," Ellie said, nodding in admiration. "You've got an artist's eye, you know that?" Max gave a modest shrug, but his smile lingered. Then Ellie's voice grew even softer. "How about we try something today? Just one small step." Max blinked. "What do you mean?" She glanced around the empty diner, then back at him with a playful gleam in her eye. "Just you and me. One step. We'll see how far we get." Max looked down at his lap, his hands curling slightly. "I haven't stood in a long time." "I know," she replied, "but I'll be right here. We'll go slow like a game. Do you trust me?" Max looked into her eyes, saw the confidence there, and nodded. Ellie gently moved his sketchbook aside, positioning herself next to him. She reached out with both hands. "Okay, buddy. Ready?" Max took a deep breath and carefully gripped her hands. Ellie braced herself and gently pulled, encouraging Max to lean forward. His arms trembled and his legs barely moved, but slowly, shakily, he pushed down on the footrest and began to rise. His knees shook. Ellie steadied him. "You're doing amazing. Just breathe." Max's legs were stiff, resistant, but he was standing, wobbling but standing. For the first time in almost 2 years, his eyes widened. "I'm up." "Yes, you are." Ellie beamed, holding his hands tightly. "Look at you, Max." He wobbled and almost lost his balance, but Ellie caught him under the arms just in time. He was still standing. "Want to take a step?" she whispered. Max nodded, jaw clenched with concentration. Ellie stepped back slightly, guiding his right foot forward, inch by inch. His left foot followed, slow and unsure. "1," she counted softly. "2." They laughed together, shaky and breathless. Ellie took another step back, and Max followed. He was clumsy but moving. "You're dancing with me," Ellie grinned. "Look at you go." Max laughed, a full, unguarded laugh. Ellie spun around on her toes, twirled once in joy, and then reached back to him, letting him rest his weight on her once more. She took both his hands, and together they danced a few more steps across the empty diner, her whispering encouragement and his giggles rising like music. The door opened. Logan entered mid-sentence on his phone, then froze. His phone dropped to his side. There, in the middle of the diner, his son, who hadn't walked in nearly 2 years, was standing, holding hands with a young waitress, moving step by step across the floor. Logan couldn't breathe. His heart raced and his throat tightened. He stood frozen, watching Max shuffle forward, a look of pure joy on his face. Ellie looked up and saw Logan. She paused, allowing Max to lean into her. "Your dad's here," she whispered. Max turned his head and smiled. "Daddy, look, I'm walking." Logan stepped forward, slow and wide-eyed, his emotions crashing over him in waves. He knelt, arms open. Max let go of Ellie and took 2 more unsteady steps before collapsing into his father's arms. Logan held him tight, tears streaming down his face. Max buried his face in his father's shoulder, laughing between breaths. Ellie stood nearby, her hands over her mouth, eyes shining with pride. For a long moment, no one spoke. Finally, Logan looked up at her, his voice hoarse. How? How did you do this? Ellie shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. I didn't. He did. Outside, the world continued on. Cars passed by, and the wind rustled through the trees. But inside that small diner, something had changed forever, and no one would ever be the same again. The diner was quieter than usual the next morning. The usual clinking of plates and soft conversations seemed hushed in the presence of something unspoken. Logan sat alone at the corner booth, a steaming mug of coffee untouched in front of him. His gaze wasn't on the menu or the window. He was watching Ellie. She moved between the tables with her usual grace. But now, Logan saw it differently. Not as a routine or obligation, but as a purpose. There was something behind her smile, something that lingered longer than politeness, deeper than habit. When she finally approached his table, he stood, uncertain of why. Can we talk? He asked. Ellie nodded, surprised but not apprehensive. Sure, she said. You want to go out back? The alley behind the diner wasn't glamorous, but it was quiet. A single wooden bench sat under a rusted tin awning, and the faint smell of bread and lavender drifted from the herb garden Ellie had planted in cracked pots. They sat down, and Logan broke the silence. You first. I need to know what you did for Max, and I need to know now. Ellie glanced down at her hands, fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her apron. After a deep breath, she replied, Because someone once believed I could dance again, too. He frowned, puzzled. Dance? She nodded slowly. I used to be a dancer. Ballet, modern, and even a bit of ballroom. Right after high school, I toured with a small company. It was everything to me. Logan listened intently, surprised by the softness in her voice. I had just landed a lead role in a major show, my first time in the spotlight. Then, 2 weeks before opening night, I was in a car accident. Not a severe one, but enough to fracture my hip and tear a ligament. Surgery was risky, and the rehab was long. My insurance? Let's just say it didn't cover the dreams that come with recovery. Her voice didn't waver, but her words slowed. I lost everything. My spot in the company, the scholarship I was supposed to begin that fall, and even the dance studio I trained at. They hired someone else. And my parents? They didn't know how to handle a daughter who couldn't do what she was born to do. Logan stayed silent, knowing there was nothing to say. I worked odd jobs, tried to pay off medical bills. Ended up here, waiting tables, telling myself it was just temporary. But the truth is, I was stuck. Ellie finally met his eyes, her expression vulnerable but firm. When I first saw Max, I recognized that look in his eyes, the quiet sadness of, I guess this isn't for me. I've lived it. I know what it feels like to want to move, but feels as though the world has glued your feet to the ground. Logan stared at her, feeling his throat tighten. You saw yourself in him. I still do, she said, her voice softening. A heavy pause settled between them, full of unspoken understanding. I thought you were just overly enthusiastic, he admitted. Too kind, maybe, but I didn't see it either, Ellie said gently. Most people don't, she added. They see the apron and the coffee pot and think that's all there is. But it's not, she whispered, her voice barely audible. The breeze stirred the leaves in the pots, causing the lavender and thyme to rustle. Ellie gazed at the sky, lost in thought. There was a time when I thought about ending it all. When I could barely afford food, the pain wouldn't stop, and I couldn't dance. I couldn't breathe without remembering who I used to be. She turned back to him, her voice trembling for the first time. But then Max came in week after week, and he smiled at me as if I mattered. He didn't know my story, but somehow he helped me find a new one. Logan couldn't speak, just staring at her, the woman who had helped his son stand, giving nothing but faith and patience, and in the process had found something worth holding on to herself. You save him, Logan finally said. Ellie shook her head. No, he saved me. In that moment, Something shifted, not just in Logan's understanding of Ellie, but in how he saw his own life. The grief he had buried like armor, keeping the world at a distance, was cracked open by a woman with a limp and a story, who had nothing more than kindness and the courage to take life one step at a time. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft golden light over the buildings as Logan pulled into the diner's parking lot. It had become a ritual now. Early mornings, quiet booths, Max's sketchpad on the table, and Ellie moving between customers as if she were made of sunlight and music. But Logan didn't just come for the routine, or even for food. He came for her. Logan Evans was a man who most people described as a successful CEO of a booming tech firm, with millions in the bank and a name that demanded respect in any boardroom. But no one ever described him as warm, joyful, or whole, especially not since his wife passed away. It had been 2 years, but the grief never softened. It had just learned to hide better. He buried himself in work, in organizing Max's therapies, in controlling everything he could, because what he couldn't control had taken everything from him. And despite all his wealth, influence, and control, he had resigned himself to the belief that Max would never walk again. Until Ellie. At first, he dismissed her as just a waitress, too cheerful. But then, he saw the way Max lit up when she entered the room, how his eyes followed her every move as if watching her made the pain hurt a little less. And now, every time Logan sat across from Max and watched Ellie kneel beside his son's wheelchair, coaxing him to try a stretch or guide his hands into a new pose, encouraging him to stay on his feet just a little longer, he saw a kind of hope he had long since given up on. Over the next few weeks, things began to change. Max laughed more. He asked to visit the diner, even on the days when Logan was too exhausted to argue. He began humming the songs Ellie had played on the radio while working. Then, one afternoon, Logan walked in and saw something that made him freeze in place. Ellie was in the center of the room, her arms raised as Max stood beside her, not holding on to her, not leaning on a chair, just standing. His legs shook, his expression intense. But he was standing on his own. It lasted only a few seconds, but Logan couldn't catch his breath. Ellie turned and met his gaze, her face beaming with a mixture of joy and tears. Max glanced over, radiant with pride. "Dad, did you see?" Logan nodded, swallowing hard. "I did, buddy. I saw everything." Later that evening, after Max finished his dinner and was fast asleep in the backseat of the car, Logan sat alone behind the wheel, parked outside their home. The radio was off, and the streetlights hummed softly. Logan stared out through the windshield, unable to move. Tears slipped down his face before he even noticed them. He didn't sob, didn't break down. It was quieter than that, just a man letting go of something he had held on to for too long. Grief, guilt, fear, it all slipped silently down his face. For the first time since his wife's funeral, Logan allowed himself to believe in something beyond survival. He believed in possibility. He believed in Max. And maybe, for the first time ever, he believed they might actually be okay. And more than that, he believed he could hope again. He glanced at the rearview mirror and saw his son curled up, peacefully sleeping, a small smile still lingering on his face. Then his thoughts turned to Ellie, her soft voice, her fierce heart, the way she saw Max, not as broken, but as brave. Logan whispered into the stillness, "Thank you." He didn't know what tomorrow might bring, but for the first time in years, he was eager to find out. It began with a simple question, asked with a spark of courage and hope. One quiet afternoon, while Max napped in the booth after a long therapy session, Ellie slid into the seat across from Logan and looked him in the eyes. "Let me work with him every day after school." Logan blinked. "You already do more than enough." "I want to do more," she said softly. "I want to try something consistent, focused, not just stretching or standing. I want to help him move, really move." Logan hesitated. His first instinct was to say no. He wanted to protect, to control. But then he thought of Max. He remembered the way Max's eyes lit up when he entered the diner, the way he laughed with Ellie, how he stood, and the words caught in his throat. "Okay," he finally said. "Yes." They transformed Logan's backyard into something magical. It started with a small, cleared area of level ground. Ellie brought in old yoga mats, garden lights, and a speaker playing soft classical music. Logan helped her build a low railing out of PVC pipes and wood for Max to grip. They used chalk to mark out the dance floor, each line representing a goal, a boundary, a step forward. Ellie called them magic paths, and Max loved them. Every afternoon after school and work, they gathered in the backyard. Max wore sneakers instead of his usual brace, and Ellie dressed in leggings and a faded tank top with a dancer's silhouette on the front. Logan would often sit on the porch, pretending to read the paper, but his eyes were always on them. "Okay," Ellie would say, "today we waltz." "Just like a gentleman?" Max would giggle. "But I can't dance," he'd protest. "You already are," Ellie would whisper, gently guiding his foot forward, then to the side. One step, then two. Some days, Max struggled to stand. Some days, he made it halfway across the yard, and some days he collapsed into Ellie's arms, laughing. Never discouraged, Logan started joining them. Not at first, but eventually, Ellie would catch him rolling up his sleeves, dragging a rake across the grass, quietly clearing space so Max wouldn't trip. One day, he picked up Max's other hand, and the three of them walked 3 steps together, father, son, and the woman who was no longer just a waitress. There were moments, brief but shining, when Logan and Ellie would share a look across the yard, not flirtatious, but filled with understanding, a silent exchange that said, "We're building something together." One golden evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the yard in shades of copper and amber, Max sat on the edge of the mat and looked up at his father. "Dad," he asked softly, "do you think Mom can see me now?" Logan froze. Ellie did, too. He knelt beside his son and nodded slowly. "I think she sees you every day." "Do you think she's proud?" Logan whispered, brushing his hand through Max's hair. "I think," he said, his voice full of emotion, "she's never been prouder." That night, Ellie stayed a little longer. Max had fallen asleep on the couch after dinner, and Logan walked her to her car. The porch light flickered, casting a warm glow around them. "Thank you," Logan said quietly, "for giving back a part of his life." Ellie looked at him, her voice soft. "He's giving it back to me, too." They stood there in silence for a moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. Then she left. Hours later, unable to sleep, Ellie returned. She had forgotten her phone charger on the porch. She parked quietly, not wanting to wake them, but as she stepped toward the porch, she stopped. The yard was dimly lit by moonlight, and in the center of the chalk-marked floor stood Logan. He was on his knees, hands clasped in front of him, his head bowed low. She could hear his voice, carried softly through the stillness. "Please," he whispered, "please, just let him dance once in his life. Not for me, not for her, just for him. He deserves that." Ellie stood frozen, her heart aching. She had seen Logan's strength, his anger, his control, but never this raw, beautiful, breaking plea. And in that moment, she understood everything. The man, the father, the grief, the hope. She stepped back, silently, letting the prayer hang in the air undisturbed because it was sacred. And maybe, just maybe, it was already being answered. The ballroom was alive with laughter, champagne flutes clinking and soft jazz floating through the air. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the crowd of donors, executives and philanthropists, all gathered under the banner of Logan's new initiative, a foundation for children with mobility challenges. The event was magnificent, the kind of gala people would talk about for weeks in advance. And everything had to be flawless. Ellie stood behind a velvet curtain, holding Max's small hand. He was dressed in a white shirt tucked into black pants. His shoes were polished and tightly laced. She knelt in front of him, adjusting his collar with a gentle touch. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" she whispered beneath the music. Max nodded, his eyes wide yet calm. "I practiced every day." Ellie smiled, her heart racing. "Do you remember the steps?" 1, 2, hold pivot, he recited. "That's my guy," she whispered. She squeezed his hand and kissed the top of his head. "Let's show them." On the far side of the ballroom, Logan was in the middle of conversation with a major donor when he noticed movement behind the curtain. His brow furrowed. The performance wasn't scheduled yet, just a brief musical break. Then the lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room as the MC stepped forward. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "before we continue, we'd like to present a small but very special surprise." The piano began, soft, delicate notes flowing like water. Logan turned toward the stage just as the curtain parted, and Max stepped out. Logan froze. His son was walking. No braces, no wheelchair. His steps were slow, careful, and deliberate. The crowd held its breath, watching as Ellie followed behind him step by step, her hands poised at her sides, ready in case he stumbled. Logan took a step forward. Panic flickered in his eyes. His voice caught in his throat. "Ellie, what are you doing?" But then Max turned his head and locked eyes with his father in the crowd. He smiled. "I want to try," he said loudly, clearly over the soft music. "For you and for her." Logan's heart clenched. The music swelled. Max took another step, and then another, 6 in total, slow, measured, but standing tall. When he reached the center of the stage, Ellie joined him, taking his small hand in hers. Then, gently, they turned, pivoting in a full circle. It wasn't flawless, it wasn't smooth, but it was real, joyful, and full of life. The audience gasped, then erupted into applause, cheers, and tears. People stood. Phones were raised to capture the moment. But Logan didn't move. He simply watched, his hand pressed over his heart, eyes filled with emotion. Max was laughing now, his eyes shining under the stage lights. Ellie twirled beside him, then knelt beside him, letting him lean on her as they both took a bow. The applause thundered. Logan slowly took a step forward, then another. When they reached the edge of the stage, Max reached for him. Logan scooped him up without hesitation, holding him close, too overwhelmed to speak. "You did it," he whispered against his son's hair. "You really did it." Max grinned. "We did it. Me and Ms. Ellie." Logan looked at Ellie then. She stood nearby, wiping a tear from her cheek, her smile soft but radiant. He mouthed the words, "Thank you." She didn't answer with words. She just nodded, because sometimes words aren't needed. That night, beneath the sparkling lights of the ballroom, something more than just a performance had occurred. A boy had danced, a father had believed, and a woman who had once lost everything had helped create something unforgettable. Not for attention, not for applause, but for love. And the music, gentle and eternal, continued to play in their hearts. The days following the gala shimmered with a quiet, lingering magic. Logan and Ellie began to spend more time together, no longer bound by therapy sessions or quiet diner chats, but through long evening walks, shared dinners at Logan's house, and laughter that came easily and naturally. Max was the happiest of all. "I finally have someone else to tell my bedtime stories to," he declared one night, proudly pulling Ellie by the hand into his room, a stack of books under his arm. Ellie laughed, letting him climb into bed while Logan leaned in the doorway, arms folded, watching them as though trying to memorize the moment. "She's better than me." "At the voices," he admitted, as Ellie brought a dragon to life with a growl that made Max squeal with joy. As the weeks passed, they settled into a rhythm. Not perfect, not scripted, but real. Then one morning, a letter arrived for Ellie. She opened at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling slightly, Max and Logan watching her with curiosity. When she read the words aloud, her voice cracked. She had been accepted into a year-long certification program to become a licensed dance therapist specializing in children with mobility impairments. The scholarship covered everything: tuition, housing, materials. She looked up, stunned. "It's in Chicago." The room went quiet for a moment. Then Logan stood, walked over, and pulled her into a hug. "You have to go," he said without hesitation. "This is what you were born to do." Tears filled her eyes. "But what about Max? What about us?" Logan smiled, cupping her face gently. "We're not going anywhere. You don't have to choose between your dream and us." And just like that, the fear that coiled in her chest since the envelope arrived began to unravel. That night, as they lay beneath a blanket of stars in Logan's backyard, Max asleep inside and the world hushed around them, Ellie turned to Logan. "Are you ever scared," she asked, "that I'll leave too? That this might not last?" He was silent for a beat, the moonlight catching the edge of his jaw. Then he looked at her. "I'd rather love and lose you," he said quietly, "than never try." Her breath caught, because that was the thing with Logan. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken promises. And in that moment, Ellie knew he was fully committed. 2 days later, something happened that no one expected. They were in the yard again, Ellie drawing new chalk paths, Logan setting up the speaker, and Max bouncing with excitement at their usual routine. But this time, as Ellie turned to start the music, Max suddenly stood on his own, without any help. "Wait," he said, his eyes wide with inner fire. "Let me try." Ellie and Logan froze. Max took a deep breath. Then, without holding on to anything or anyone, he took a step forward. One step, then another and another. 3 strong, steady steps. Then 2 more. On the 6th, he stumbled and fell into Logan's arms, but he was laughing, breathless, and victorious. Ellie clapped her hand over her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Logan held his son tightly, tears streaming down his face. "You did it," he whispered. "You really did it." Max looked at Ellie, still in disbelief, and grinned. "I wanted to surprise you." She dropped to her knees beside him and hugged him tightly. "Best surprise I've ever had." That moment marked something profound. Not just Max's strength, not just Logan's love, but the realization that no matter what the future held, challenges could be overcome. They weren't just healing each other anymore. They were a family, and nothing could take that away. The dance studio smelled of fresh paint and lavender-scented floor polish. Sunlight poured through tall windows, spilling over the wooden floors like a river of gold. Ribbons hung from the mirrors, and soft music played from an old speaker in the corner, while laughter echoed from every corner. Ellie stood in the center of it all, barefoot in soft leggings and a white blouse, her hair tied back, her eyes gleaming with pride. Around her, children moved in clumsy, joyful rhythm. Some walked with braces, others with walkers, some twirled with arms outstretched, and others swayed in place. It didn't matter. In this space, every child was a dancer, and Max stood beside her. At 10 years old, he had become her unofficial assistant, encouraging a shy new student, demonstrating stretches, and even helping choose the music for their weekly freestyle circle. He wore a whistle around his neck like a coach, but it was mostly used to make the others laugh. "I'm not a real teacher," he would joke. "You're the best kind of teacher," Ellie always replied. "You know what it means to try." After every class, parents gathered at the windows, their eyes filled with tears as they watched their children move in ways doctors had once said were impossible. Ellie's classes were free, funded entirely by Logan's foundation, which had now expanded and thrived. But Ellie never talked about money. Only movement, only music, only hope. The wedding was 2 weeks away. Ellie and Logan planned it together simply and beautifully. A garden ceremony behind the studio, with fairy lights, wildflowers, and a dance floor under the stars. No caterers, no tuxedos. Just love, laughter, and a shared belief in new beginnings. Max was the most excited of all. He took his role seriously, drawing invitation card by hand, picking out songs for the playlist, and writing a speech that he kept like a secret only Ellie knew. He was nervous about reading it aloud. "You'll be great," she told him one night as he practiced, whispering to the mirror. "You're already the heart of this family." The night before the wedding, Ellie sat alone in the studio, staring at a white garment bag hanging from the wall. She unzipped it slowly, her hands trembling slightly. Inside was the ballet costume she had never worn. White chiffon, delicate tulle, lace stitched along the neckline. She had kept it all these years, tucked away like a piece of another life. But now, it no longer represented something lost. It had become something transformed. On the wedding day, she wore it not as a dancer performing for applause, but as a woman stepping into a life she had choreographed with grace, pain, and purpose. The garden was glowing with soft light. Chairs lined up along the aisle. Friends, family, and students from the studio gathered with smiles and tissues. Max stood at the front, holding the ring box with pride. Logan watched as Ellie walked down the aisle, her dress catching the light as though it had been meant for this moment all along. His eyes never left her. The ceremony was short but heartfelt. They exchanged vows with laughter and tears, and when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. Max was the first to run up and hug them both. Then came the moment Max had been preparing for. He stepped up to the small platform, cleared his throat, and held up a folded paper. "I was going to say something funny," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "But I think this is better." He glanced at Ellie, then Logan, and then back down at his paper. "I used to think I'd never dance. I used to think dreams were only for other kids. But then she came along, and she didn't just show me how to move. She showed me how to smile again." He turned to Logan, and he didn't just protect me. He believed in me, even when I didn't. He believed in both of us. Max took a deep breath. "So, I just want to say thank you." He looked at the crowd, then back at his parents. "She taught me to dance, and he taught me to believe." Silence hung in the air for a moment. Then the room erupted into applause, cheers, and tears. Ellie wiped her eyes. Logan reached over and pulled Max into a tight hug. That night, under the stars, Ellie and Logan danced together for the first time as husband and wife, and Max joined them, spinning gently in his own rhythm, surrounded by friends and family on the same floor where he had once taken his first unsteady steps. It wasn't a recital. It wasn't a performance. It was their life, and it was breathtaking. The field glowed in the golden light of late afternoon, the kind that softens everything, making it feel as though the earth itself paused to witness something sacred. Wildflowers danced in the breeze, and the tall grass shimmered under the setting sun. A wooden arch, handcrafted and adorned with simple linen and vines, stood at the heart of it all. Guests sat in rows of white chairs nestled into the earth, their faces filled with emotion and anticipation. There was no grand orchestra, no red carpet, just the sound of birds, the gentle rustle of wind, and the faint strumming of an acoustic guitar coming from the edge of the clearing. Ellie stood at the edge of the aisle, her white ballet dress fluttering with each step she took across the grass. She was barefoot, her hair loosely curled, a crown of baby's breath woven into her strands as she walked forward. Her gaze never left Logan, who stood beneath the arch in a gray vest with rolled sleeves, his heart shining in his eyes. Max stood beside him, a small boutonniere pinned to his jacket, his hands clasped in front of him. When he saw Ellie approaching, his grin spread wide across his face. As Ellie reached the arch, Logan took her hands. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, taking in everything it had taken to get to this point. Every fall, every step, every note of music that had led them to this sunlit, quiet place. The officiant's words were simple, filled with warmth and humor, but it was the vows that made the field fall silent. "I used to think my story ended on a stage," Ellie said, her voice trembling. "But it turns out that was only the first act. You gave me a second chance. Not just at love, but at joy, at purpose, at family." Logan's voice was low and steady. "You walked into our lives and made music where there had been silence. You didn't just teach Max to dance. You taught me to feel. Again, I vow to stand beside you always, whether we're soaring or stumbling." There were tears, of course, soft gasps, hands held tightly in the crowd. Then, when the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the crowd erupted into applause. But before Ellie and Logan could kiss, Max stepped forward, holding out his hand to Ellie. "May I have this dance?" he asked. Ellie knelt slightly, her smile glowing. "You may." The guitarist played a slow, sweet melody. Max held Ellie's hand gently, his other hand resting lightly in hers. Together, they swayed under the arch, in front of the guests, in front of the world. Then Logan joined them, one hand on Ellie's back, the other on Max's shoulder. The three of them moved in a slow, perfect triangle. There was no choreography, no performance, just movement, connection, love. The crowd watched in silence, tears flowing freely, smiles never fading. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden rays across the field, the family moved beyond the arch and into the open grass. Ellie twirled gently, Max stepped confidently, and Logan followed with an ease that came from being fully, completely present. They danced until the sky turned amber, until the stars began to twinkle to life, until all that remained was the memory of movement, music, and a moment no one would forget. Ellie looked up at Logan, Max nestled between them and whispered, "We did it." And Logan smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. Together, in the final moment of the evening, as the sky turned lavender and the field grew quiet, 3 figures danced beneath the open sky, hand in hand, heart to heart. Not a recital, not a dream. A life, one dance, one love, one forever. As the final notes of their dance faded into the twilight, we're reminded that healing doesn't always come with loud triumphs, but often in quiet moments, gentle hands, and the courage to take one more step. Ellie, Logan, and Max showed us that family isn't just something we're born into. Sometimes it's something we build, step by step, breath by breath, and beat by beat. If this story touched your heart, reminded you the power of second chances, and the beauty of believing in someone, please consider subscribing to Echoes of Resilience. Here, we bring you tales that uplift, inspire, and remind us all of the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you for watching. And remember, sometimes all it takes is one dance to change a life. Sa.